Today on Maker Ranch, we're talking about how small projects can lead to big opportunities. So one of the early projects I did for Homemade Modern was using 2-liter plastic soda bottles to make concrete pendant lamps. And at the time I was just using off-the-shelf concrete. And I really didn't know what I was doing. I tried a bunch of different mixes and kind of fumbled around until I got to work. 14, 15 years later, I have so much more experience with concrete. I know about pigments. I know about how to mix my own mixes, and I can get much finer and more specific results. I can add color. I know how to add in pipes to make these little lamps. Still don't know a whole lot about electronics, so the wiring is still pretty primitive. And one of the things that made me think about this is we just finished one of my biggest commissions. We did that series of wooden island benches for the Dataland Museum in LA, which is now open, and you should check out if you're in the Southern California area. It's pretty incredible. One of the ways that those people found me to give me that commission is they had been following along since they were in architecture school for some of my early DIY concrete projects. And so even though pendant lamps have nothing to do with museum furniture, if I hadn't done these projects, I wouldn't have created that connection that made them follow me for over a decade before they finally had an opportunity to collaborate. So I've talked a little bit about this idea that I really like in business for creatives, which is escalation rather than scaling. To recap, what that means is traditional business, they make one product. So let's say it's a pendant lamp, and then they try to sell it. As soon as they sell it, they're like, okay, if we sold one and made this much money, how do we sell 100? And then after they sell 100, they think, okay, how can we manufacture these for less to increase our margins? That's scaling, and they try to build a business around selling more and more of that item or widget and make their process of manufacturing and producing them more and more efficient. I've taken a different approach that I think is actually much more effective if you're really interested in the creative more than you are in the financial opportunities. And I still think you can do both, but when you try to focus on one too early, it can almost get in the way of what your creative goals are. For me, it's always been about escalation, right? How can I make something small so I can learn a little bit about concrete so I can then make something bigger out of concrete? And then maybe mixing concrete with wood and then concrete with steel and so on and so forth. And so what happens over time is you do a series of projects that get bigger and more challenging and more difficult. And it's almost like leveling up in a video game where you're starting modest and simple because you're at level 1. But as you sort of gain experience and skills and tools, you're ready to take on bigger and bigger challenges that would have been mind-blowing or way too difficult when you were still at the beginner level. So I really like this idea of escalation. And for me, I've gone from making vases and pendant lamps and 3-legged stools to museum for furnitures, houses, and also a hotel. So at any given point, you don't notice the evolution, right? Going from the 3-legged stool that was concrete to the pendant lamp didn't really feel like an evolutionary shift. It was just oh, I poured concrete in a bucket. Now let's pour concrete in a 2-liter soda bottle. That doesn't feel like that big of a leap. But then after I use 2-liter soda bottles and we recycle these as plastic waste, but you have to kind of cut them out to get the concrete out of it. Then I started thinking about, could I melt down this plastic and use it for one more thing? And eventually we did a guitar just out of shredded up plastic. It wasn't 2-liter soda bottles, it was milk jugs, because the plastics have to be of the same type in order for them to bond together. But every time you experiment with something new, and whether you succeed or fail for that specific project, you're adding just a little bit of information. You're adding a little bit of familiarity with a new tool or material. And those things start to make you really formidable as a creative the more of those experiences you have under your belt. So when the Dataland people first reached out, they were saying, oh, we had seen your concrete stuff. We want concrete chairs and benches for this thing. So we did some renderings and some designs, and they were nice, but kind of felt like work I've already done. So we also pitched them and showed them some of my carved wooden benches that are more in organic form. And they ended up going in that direction. And so I was so happy that like I have a portfolio of all different types of materials and work that I can show them different ideas that I've already done that could be extrapolated into the specific geometric needs for their museum. And it was really nice thinking that they came to me for concrete, but they ended up with something wood and I think way more appropriate for the space. And if I was a concrete only fabricator, I wouldn't have been able to sort of give them a direction that turned out to be best for them, because I would want to keep the commission and have to push them towards my skill set. So I think the point of the story is take your small projects seriously. And that doesn't mean that they shouldn't not be fun. They should be fun. Things can be serious and fun at the same time. As I always say, seriously ridiculous, but ridiculously serious. And so the next time you're throwing out a old milk carton or a piece of plastic trash, or you're getting a beverage at a gas station and you're looking at the bottle, think a little bit about what you could make with it. And if you like the idea, try it. Concrete's really cheap. This is probably about $2 worth of concrete and pigments. There's probably like another 50 cents to $1 for the little steel tube that is typical for lamp hardware. But you can make permanent things out of real material for surprisingly small amounts of money. And I think as it relates to concrete, and one of the things that we're going to be doing at the upcoming High Desert Design Week workshops is really playing a lot with color, because concrete is so affordable. And with all the pigments we're going to have there, you can really get a lot of different tones and gradients and color combinations. And it all comes out like smooth stone. So, and that doesn't mean that I still can't make a bunch of these. Just because I've gone on to bigger projects, I thought it would be kind of fun to revisit some of the old projects that I liked, but I really didn't feel like I took full advantage of. So recently, I've been working on tables made out of one sheet of plywood and revisiting some of the very basic DIY projects. And in both cases, I'm adding color, I'm adding different techniques to it, because I've learned a lot in the years since I first tried those projects. I still love the concept of using trash and inexpensive materials, and I still love the efficiency and design challenge of using one sheet of plywood to make something completely. But now I feel like I'm revisiting it with a lot more skills and a lot more optionality from a design standpoint. So throw yourself into whatever creative endeavor you got in front of you. It could be the most basic woodworking. It could be a very simple home renovation. It's not uncommon for people to be dissatisfied with their own work after they complete it. I find it really helpful to make a list of like, well, why am I not 100% satisfied with the result? Sometimes it might be, oh, the color didn't come out, or I see scratches on it, or this finish isn't great, or it's a little bit off. It might just be that you didn't like the geometry that you picked and the base is too thick for the legs. All of that is good, and it just means you might have a better shot at revisiting it in the future. But in the meantime, don't stress it. Don't immediately, throw it away and throw it out. Get some use out of it, let it marinate, be around it, have it in your space. And this is why I think DIYing yourself is like the ultimate grad school for designers. I went to a very expensive graduate school for design and architecture. I learned more in the first 2 years of DIYing things for the early stages of Homemade Modern than I did in those 2 years of grad school. And one made me money and the other one cost me a lot of money. Doesn't mean graduate school wasn't valuable. It was intellectually challenging. I met a lot of cool people. But in terms of like direct knowledge of design that would like help me more and more, I'm still using techniques that I learned in those first 2 years, 15 years later. I'm not using a lot of the urban design lectures in my day-to-day life these days. So if you can make things that are just good enough for you, get service out of them, you're going to walk by them every day in your home or apartment, and you'll always come up with like new ideas. Oh, I should have done this, or I should have done this, and I should have done that. Catalog those, and then after you've gotten a good amount of use out of them, revisit them. Also, if you're in a situation where you're renting, it's a great opportunity to do a series of DIY projects when you first move into a rental. And then, maybe a few years later, you're getting ready to move out. Maybe it's time to get rid of them and then make some little notes about what you learned and then do a new series for the new place. But just some thoughts. Check it out. All right, Shane, overrated, underrated. What do we got?
Let's hit it. In-N-Out.
In-N-Out's properly rated. Like, people really like it. It's a good burger. I think In-N-Out's a great example of how simplicity can equal quality because they repeat and just do very simple things over and over and over again. They can invest in their own supply chain. They don't have all these different ingredients. They're not doing chicken. They're not doing fish sandwiches. They're just doing burgers. And I think when you narrow focus, it allows you to achieve much better quality and efficiency.
Carpenter's pencils.
I don't think carpenter pencils really make that much sense. Look, you can get a whole bunch of bulk round pencils for nothing on Amazon. Get a good pencil sharpener. I don't like carpenter's pencil because to me, whatever time you save by it being rectangular and not rolling off the thing, you lose it when you have to resharpen it. Whereas a round pencil mechanical sharpener, you stick it in, bzz, sharpens it perfectly, way better, way faster. So get a good pencil sharpener and just a whole big box of basic pencils.
Mechanical pencils.
Mechanical pencils are nice if you're like drawing on graph paper, but I prefer ballpoint pens for drawing. I like the permanence of the line. I don't like that they get kind of faded and smudged. So if I am doing more of a technical drawing, just the first draft of it, I prefer a ballpoint pen, but that's unusual. I know a lot of designers really like mechanical pencils, particularly because it's such a fine point, and with that little steel shroud, if you have a really thin, precise metal ruler, you can get real precise with your ticks. But I'm typically fine with normal pencils for in the shop, and when it comes to drawing in a sketchbook, I prefer a ballpoint pen.
Tree houses.
Tree houses are overrated. And don't get me wrong, I love a good tree house. But what's happened is like that people want them to be so big and grand that they end up just building a house on stilts that a tree goes through. And I think tree houses were really fun as a kid. Me and my brother built 2 or 3 really pretty substantial ones over our childhood career. And the fun part was like it felt like you were up off the ground. It was your own little private space and for you and your friends. But they weren't like, fully boxed out like an actual house in a tree. They were just platforms with like railings and like makeshift ladders, and we had a zip line to connect them. So it was really fun to build. I think once they got kind of professionalized and you can get these hardware kits for them, it's really just like building an elevated house. So I think there's this kind of era where, someone did a tree house that did really well on Airbnb, and people have been trying to rebuild them. I think elevated houses are interesting and underrated. So to find a huge tree that can support a massive structure is hard. And that tree is probably pretty amazing by itself. And I wouldn't really want to take this like one of one amazing tree that's big and old enough to really support it, and then drill holes into it, anchor into it, clamp things around it. What I would rather do is find like a wooded area, and that doesn't really exist in Joshua Tree, but when I'm on the East Coast and you're just like driving down the highway, you'll often see just, solid kind of forest, but none of the trees are that big. They might only have trunks that are, 10 inches to maybe like 16 or 18 inches in diameter, but it's just solid walls of trees. Very typical in the areas outside of Boston. Not massive redwoods, not massive oak trees, but just tall maple, sycamore, whatever it is out there, elm. So what I think is really interesting is an elevated house, because not one of those trees would be big enough to support the house. But if you built the house on stilts, then you could actually have a long ramp going into it, so it's not, a real steep staircase. But then when you look out the windows, you're kind of, maybe like 10 to 15 feet off the ground. You're looking right through the treetops, and you're getting a little bit more light. Whereas those kind of forests tend to be pretty dense, and so they're kind of swampy and moist at the bottom. So what typically happens is people clear out patches of these forests, and then they build the house, and then there's like a lawn, and then there's like a forest perimeter. I think what would be interesting is like sort of a long tubular house that's going about 10 to 15 feet above the ground on stilts or some sort of truss. And I think that would be interesting to give the treehouse feel, but to not have to build the structure around trees that are too small. So elevated houses in like a dense forested area, I think underrated.
Being homeschooled.
Well, I did a whole video on being homeschooled. I think it's so specific that I don't really feel comfortable giving it an overrated or underrated. I think just like school in general, there's universities that are great and there's universities that are a waste of money. I think there's people that screw up homeschooling, and I think there's people that do it really well. I think in general, it's about the motivation. Homeschooling works great when the primary motivation is to make the children's world bigger. And it goes poorly when it's about controlling that world and making it smaller.
Hot tubs.
Hot tubs are overrated. Outdoor bathtubs are underrated. In general, I think filling up something with water to get in is nice. Having stagnant water there that you get in over and over again, especially in Airbnb, I think Airbnb hot tubs are pretty gross. You don't know what the people before you did in it. And at the Reset Hotel, one of the things that we did that I really, really like is on the suites, we have private outdoor bathtubs. So you fill up your own clean hot water, take a bath, drain it, amazing.
Hot dogs.
Hot dogs are underrated these days because they're not that common, especially when you consider how common burgers are. Burgers are everywhere. Hot dogs are rare. I love a good hot dog every once in a while. Would I eat them every day? No. But I think they're, definitely underrated.
Karaoke.
I think karaoke is great for people that really enjoy singing. That's not me. I would rather listen to music with friends than hear friends sing, particularly if they're not very good. So overrated for me, but it's kind of like I don't really go and play a lot of pickup basketball right now. I used to when I was younger. It was fun, but these days not that interested, but always happy if other people enjoy it. They should go do it.
Instant ramen.
Instant ramen to me just feels unnecessary, right? Like it is fast and it's easy, but it's not good for you. It's kind of empty things. You can add healthy things to it, and I guess it could serve as a substrate. I ate a lot of it in college, and then probably the first 5 years after that, it was low cost, affordable calories. But I would say that it's overrated because I still think it would be better to get a rice cooker, and rice would be even less expensive and also better for you.
AirPods.
AirPods, I think, are one of the most underrated technological breakthroughs in the last 10 years, right? I think on its own, AirPods are like a bigger business than Snapchat. They've probably increased the amount of audio content people listen to. And I don't think that the podcast and audiobook world would have thrived as much if it wasn't for AirPods. So I would say they're probably underrated in terms of how much they've impacted our day-to-day life. I also think if I was to bet on an interface that becomes the interface that people end up using to activate AI, I probably would lean towards it being more something like an AirPod in the future than glasses.
The beach.
Growing up in Southern California in like the 80s and 90s, the beach had a certain prestige. There were shows like Baywatch. Like the beach was this cool California landscape that was like super desirable. Having a beach house was a big deal. Going to MTV's Spring Break Beach House was like the epicenter of like youth culture. These days, I feel like beaches have kind of gone down in terms of brand. Like I almost think that people would rather go to Aspen or to Montana or into the mountains than to the beach. And I think in Southern California, a lot of the beaches have become just like a little bit poorly maintained. Like Venice Beach is just not a super clean, pleasant experience. And whereas beaches in Santa Barbara, still pretty nice, taken care of. But overall, I think like the beach has kind of become overrated. And I think mountains are kind of what people want.
Okay, last one. Consumer CNCs.
My CNC currently that I use is probably in the prosumer range. It's definitely not a professional one, but it's a little bit more expensive than a consumer one. And that's the X-Carve Pro by Inventables. The first X-Carve that I have was definitely a hobbyist one. This one's a little more substantial and powerful. I think they're fine and they're great. Like I think they're Pound for pound, I think they're probably the most useful digital fabrication tool out there, especially for the type of stuff that I do. I still think hand power tools are way more versatile than any digital fabrication machine. So if I was to tell people where to spend their first $1,000, probably wouldn't be on a CNC unless they have an extensive kind of graphic design and digital design background. I would probably push them towards getting the few basic power tools. Thanks for watching Maker Ranch. Be sure to let us know what you want us to talk about in the comment section below and share this with a friend if you think they'd like it. All right, bye.